All right, let's go ahead and jump into part three. Now, in part two, we didn't quite get to the animus, so I'm going to cover that quickly, and then we'll jump into stage three, integrate the self. And then, in the final part of the series, we'll go through all of the individuation, practical application, and tools, including shadow work, dream analysis, active imagination, methods to observe and use emotions and thoughts, and more. For a woman, these are Jung's stages of the animus. Stage one is Tarzan, man of mere physical power. The Animus first appears as a personification of mere physical power, like the fictional jungle hero Tarzan. Stage two is Byron, man of action or romance. In this next phase, the Animus possesses initiative and the capacity for planned action. The romantic man, the 19th century British poet Byron, or the man of action, America's Ernest Hemingway, war hero, hunter, etc. Stage three is Lloyd George, man as a professor, clergyman, or orator. In this third phase, the animus becomes the word, often appearing as a professor or a clergyman, the bearer of the word. And in stage four, we have Hermes, man as a spiritual guide. Finally, in his fourth manifestation, the Animus is the incarnation of meaning. On this highest level, he becomes, like the Anima, a mediator of spiritual profundity. Jung noted that in mythology, this aspect of the Animus appears as Hermes, messenger of the gods. In dreams, he is a helpful guide. Like Sophia, this is the highest level of mediation between the unconscious and conscious mind. Now, if you want to read on those in more depth, I'll leave them in the description below. But let's go ahead and get to the next stage in the process, integrate the self. The self is the last stage of self-realization. Jung wrote, "The self embraces ego consciousness, shadow, anima, and collective unconscious in indeterminable extension. As a totality, the self is a coincidentia oppositorum. It is therefore bright and dark, and yet neither." He also said that the self is the total timeless man who stands for the mutual integration of conscious and unconscious. Jung recognized many symbols representing the self, including the world tree, a stone, the elephant, and Christ. The concept of the self has evolved over time. Redfern, for example, sees the self as probably consisting of a range of subpersonalities over a lifetime. Von Franz considered that the dark side of the self is the most dangerous thing of all, precisely because the self is the greatest power in the psyche. It can cause people to spin, megalomaniac, or fall into other delusionary fantasies that catch them up, so that the subject thinks with mounting excitement that he has grasped the great cosmic riddles. He therefore risks losing all touch with human reality. The self is, ultimately, an unknown, an inner center closely connected with what Jung calls the divine. It's the archetype we must explore throughout our lives in the never-ending journey of individuation. In the Red Book, Carl Jung writes, "What is important and meaningful in my life is that I shall live as fully as possible to fulfill the divine will within me." Last but far from least, we have individuation tools and practical application. This is my favorite topic by far because using these tools allows us to take action and move forward on the path of individuation, becoming, step by step, more aligned, more integrated with the self as a whole, and thus becoming the higher versions of ourselves. I have a number of videos in this category and plan on creating many more in the coming weeks, but I'll get to that soon. The Judeo-Christian scriptures speak of the eye of the heart and seeing with spiritual eyes, and the concept of the eye being the lamp of the body that fills it with light. The Hindu Sri Shiva Tattva describes the third eye of Shiva as the eye of higher perception. Marduk had eyes all the way around his head, as Jordan Peterson likes to say. The Egyptians used the eye of Horus as a protective symbol, often as an amulet, and worshipped the eye of Ra. This list, really, it could go on forever. We've been infatuated with eyes since the beginning of human history because it represents awareness and attention, which is closely associated with knowledge. That's at least one reason, right? One big reason. Attention is your primary tool to integrate your shadow, anima or animus, and ultimately yourself. When you focus the light beam of attention on your inner archetypes, you see the real you, and you can even begin to see, slowly but surely, in a different manner, through intuition, instinct, hearing the inner voice of your conscious or soul, or perhaps even God, however you may define the divine, seeing with your inner eyes. So our first tool is attention. You can start your work by paying attention to your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Taking every thought or imagination captive to the obedience of Christ is a scripture about combating darkness and the forces of chaos inside of the mind. In other words, observe every thought and imagination and make sure it conforms to the highest ideal before it sinks into your shadow and, left unattended, slowly grows into a monster that'll manifest in the ugliest ways without warning. Write a list of the worst thoughts and the darkest emotions that you experience or have experienced, recent and from the past. List out instances of your worst behaviors. Determine what triggers those thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. See if you can spot patterns to begin to understand your shadow. Here's another method. Relive your childhood. Your childhood shaped a good portion of your shadow. To remember events that may have created part of your shadow, answer these questions. How was your relationship with your parents? How did your mother behave towards you? How did your father behave towards you? Did anyone hurt you as a child? What memory makes you emotional to this day? Pay attention to your tears, right? It reveals a lot. What dreams do you remember from your childhood? Did your parents have high expectations? Did you get punished? And for what? How is that impacting you today? How did your parents respond when you expressed your emotions? How is that impacting you today? What behaviors did your parents discourage or stifle? Or the world around you, society as a whole? What were the emotional states in your home? What made you cry? What made you angry? What made you scared? Was your environment loving or hostile? Who did you love the most and why? Who did you hate the most and why? Were you poor growing up? Were you rich growing up? And if so, how did it impact you? As you answer these questions, ask yourself, what does this reveal about my shadow? What part of this shadow does this shed light on? Here's another tool, the projection mirror. Carl Jung tells us that the best way to understand our shadow is to analyze our most difficult relationships. Every personality trait and every behavior that we despise, we also have and manifest ourselves, or have the desire or tendency to, repressed deep in the shadow. So what do you despise in others? Who do you despise and why? Those very things you despise the most are likely parts of yourself that you hate, parts buried deep in your shadow and projected onto those people. Like everyone, you often project what you don't like within yourself onto others. Think about someone you hate or have a difficult relationship with. List out the things about them that you despise. List out the things you love about them too. Pick another person if you have to. The things you hate likely exist in your shadow, and you may exhibit those behaviors and despise yourself for it. The things you love are either behaviors you admire or behaviors you wish you had. Traits and behaviors you don't exhibit often enough, if ever. The next tool on your tool belt is dreams. Watch your dream symbols. The self has deep primal wisdom that it tries to share with you through dreams. It can't communicate using language, per se, so it uses symbols and images instead. The self doesn't communicate directly with the conscious mind. According to Jung, it guides us with messages portrayed through the symbols and images in our dreams. Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz said, "Dreams are the letters of the self that the self writes us every night." Stevens, author of Private Myths, writes, Jung maintained that a crucial factor determining how conscious we are is whether we attend to our dreams and the degree to which this enables us to make what is unconscious conscious. By working with dreams, we create soul. We wake up to our total situation, become conscious, achieve wholeness. Next up, we have active imagination. Jung's active imagination, it works a lot like dreams, only you're awake. I made a two-part series on Carl Jung's active imagination process and Tesla's version of it as well, Nikola, if you're interested in a deeper understanding of the method. Now, with active imagination, you go into your imagination basically and allow the symbols and images bubble up from the unconscious as the self communicates with you. If you want to learn about Jung's active imagination, possibly the best video series I've created so far is Active Imagination, Carl Jung's Technique versus Nikola Tesla's, Part 1 and Part 2. The last thing I'll mention is shadow work. Now, I'll cover shadow work tools and methods in a much more in-depth video soon, but for now I'll point you to this video. 14 reasons to do shadow work. I think you'll like it. Anyway, that's all I have for today. That's the three-part series. I may unpack a part 4. I think there's a few things I could go into a little bit more depth on, but for now, that's all I've got. I'll see you in the next one.